Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 249, Unapologetically Introverted. Unapologetically is fast becoming one of my favourite words, not because I'm a rude, hard-nosed so-and-so. In fact, most of those who know me well will say I'm pretty much the opposite of that. So why am I loving unapologetic so much? It's because I'm classically English and therefore have lived most of my life apologising for things that weren't my fault or even a problem at all. So in this episode, I'm sharing how choosing to be unapologetic about my introversion marked a sea change in my confidence and my self-belief. If that sounds like something that would be helpful to you, find a comfy place to listen, take the weight off, and spend the next 15 minutes or so with me. Having been brought up to be polite, respecting my elders, and mindful of my P's and Q's, sorry was so common in my vocabulary. I have a remarkable story to tell you today about this, so I will elaborate in a moment. Had I have been feistier as a young adult, I might have been better placed to recognise what was mine to apologise for and what was someone else's. I also believe it was wrapped up with my dislike of angry conflict, so carrying the can was typically my way of preventing unnecessary nastiness. Now I'm quietly gutsy and ready to hold people to account rather than apologise for what wasn't mine in the first place. So, to the story. And I'm able to share this genuine case study with the kind permission of a colleague who has become a trusted and cherished friend. I think the introverts among you may see yourself in this example, and I can only hope that those of you who listen to this podcast as you have introverts in your life will also have significant moments of recognition. It's not unusual for siblings to have different personalities, as is the case here. One sibling is an introvert, I'll call her Melody, and the other an extrovert, who I will call Kyla. The names are obviously changed to protect confidentiality. Kyla and her friends, through lack of awareness and understanding, believed some of the myths around introversion and were therefore guilty of misunderstanding Melody. Kyla and her extroverted friends considered themselves allies in that they didn't dislike Melody and certainly wished her no harm. In fact, here are some of the things that they believed. Melody was a bit of a misfit who didn't have many friends, who preferred reading to messing around and therefore probably had some mental health issues. Introverts are often judged as feeling sorry for themselves, sulky, moody, lonely, and a bit pathetic. I beg to differ, as I'm sure do you. Kyla and her friends certainly thought that Melody probably needed fixing, so they set about helping her. Now, you can't see this on an audio-only podcast, but I used air quotes when I said helping. Now, I think most of we introverts will have been helped in some of these ways before. For instance, how many of you have been introduced to someone as, oh, the quiet one, so don't mind them, or have been called on to speak out when you had nothing to say and then felt foolish, or have been given a makeover so that you're more attractive, stylish and normal, or had your school bag or books taken so you couldn't hide behind them, or have been taken to a social event and pushed to the front or even in the spotlight. Maybe you've been coached in how to be witty, fun and engaging. Have you ever been set up on a blind date with someone so wrong it wasn't even funny? Or been mocked for something until you blushed really badly and then got upset? Or been extrovert-splained? It goes something like this: what she really means is blah, blah, blah. Or been excluded from things you'd like to have attended because people made up your mind for you. Or have you ever gone out with a few lively friends who insisted that you joined them, only to then be deserted? Okay, so I could go on, because there are a myriad of ways that people who think they're helping us are really not. Some of you may not have experienced anything like this in your formative years, but are experiencing something similar now in employment and adulthood. The uninvited fixers are everywhere. And when they are your manager or life partner, it can prove really challenging. What I do find sad is that many of these so-called helpers would consider themselves, and maybe even call themselves, your ally, and would swear on their life that what they were doing was in your best interest. Mostly it is not, and the only way to stop this misunderstanding and the clumsy, if well-intentioned, attempts to get us to extrovert is to inform and educate. Those who love us typically want us to live our best lives, and if they are extroverted in temperament, to them that must mean being more of an extrovert. Until they know better, they can't imagine another way. The impact of this is that we can become a little mistrustful and think all allies are trying to change who we are, rather than enabling us to be the best version of ourselves. So I recommend you give would-be allies another chance, but don't expect them to be mind readers. Unfortunately, some introvert groups are filled with complaints about how there's no point explaining. They, whoever they are, won't listen. I accept that it can be challenging, but isn't life? If I gave up every time something didn't go right the first time, I'd still be unable to walk, unable to speak, unable to drive, and so the list goes on. What really makes a difference is attitude, intention, and commitment. If you have a fixed rather than a growth mindset, you'll severely limit your own development. We learn most when we get things wrong, and we need to understand what we could do differently next time. And if you set out with the attitude that no one understands me, guess what? It's highly likely that no one will. If you set your intentions so that you're both learning from and about each other, you're more likely to have success. No one likes being lectured to or blamed or scapegoated. I'm in the business of educating people about our differences, not to create further division, but to enable inclusion. And this takes commitment. If I throw in the towel at the first obstacle, at the first, "You should just get out more and enjoy yourself, come with us, you'll have a right laugh," then I'll make no progress in terms of helping others understand us better. And by the way, I almost shudder when I get invitations like that. Why don't people realise that fun is so subjective? So the biggest and most important step is to own our introversion without shame. Let's own it unapologetically. That means being really clear on my needs and boundaries, not to hide, but so I can be the fullest expression of myself when it matters to me. I'm proud to include in my introduction that I identify as an introvert. I tend not to say I am an introvert, and that's because it's not my whole identity. And I'm not going to hide or deny my need for alone time to recharge. Now, I've known about my need to quiet time and my dislike of overly noisy, frenetic environments since I was a young child. But I only understood about introversion from my early 30s. I wonder how my journey through life might have been different had I known that earlier. Maybe I wouldn't have married a wholly unsuitable man-child. After all, 19 was no age for me to make those vows and understand the consequences. But what I am grateful for is that his cruelty awakened my sass and the early signs of my quietly gutsy capabilities. I bought a book on do-it-yourself divorce and did just that. No expensive lawyers, no protracted arguments, just over and done with. This sassier version of me kept growing stronger, entering a competition and winning a sponsored place on a Women into Management course, which was the beginning of my love of self-development. Stronger still, I applied for a promotion that my peers said I wasn't eligible for and was successful. Becoming more courageous, I took voluntary redundancy and set up my own business in 1994, which is still running successfully to this day. There was only one problem. Too much of this was done with me using more extroverted behaviours, which of course came at a cost. In my case, burnout, which required a complete reworking of my life. And I wouldn't change a thing. Not the cruelty, not the so-called advice, not the mistakes I made along the way. Our journeys through life are complex, full of challenges and unique to each of us. Nothing is guaranteed except death, and I want to live as fully as possible before then. My journey showed me what was possible, and when the pendulum swung too far in the wrong direction, I knew I could bring it back towards the right direction. This is the power of personal agency, of my ability to make choices, take actions, and influence events in my life. As you might imagine, personal agency is closely tied to the concepts of autonomy, self-determination, and empowerment. It's what I help my introverted clients discover, and once experienced, it can't easily be packed away again. That's the key difference between me as a teenager or young adult and me as the unapologetic older woman who stands tall, rattles cages, and advocates for fellow introverts. I know we have nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to be apologetic about, and nothing, except ourselves, to limit our possibilities. What about Kyla, Melody, and friends? Well, Kyla heard me talking about introversion and how our needs are different from those of an extrovert, and the penny dropped. She and Melody have an even stronger sibling relationship now, and Kyla can be a real ally to Melody. I can't think of a better way to close this episode than with a few lines written by Benj Pasek and Justin Paul. I'm sure you've heard them before, but this is a song to have on repeat when you need to stir your sass and be unapologetic. I'm not a stranger to the dark. Hide away, they say, 'cause we don't want your broken parts. I've learned to be ashamed of all my scars. Run away, they say. No one'll love you as you are. But I won't let them break me down to dust. I know that there's a place for us, for we are glorious. When the sharpest words want to cut me down, I'm going to send a flood, going to drown 'em out. I am brave. I am bruised. I am who I'm meant to be. This is me. Look out, 'cause here I come, and I'm marching on to the beat I drum. I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. This is me. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us, and leave a comment, because we know that that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
You are listening to an Intentional Media Production podcast.